All right, well, I hope everyone can hear me. Thank you, Blythe, so much for a lovely introduction. I'm really excited to be here. And I don't know how I slipped in because I'm Canadian. I'm not Japanese or American, but quite pleased that I managed to be part of this group. So Ed suggested that we have fun. So I'm going to begin this symposium a little bit differently and ask you to do a little bit of an exercise, sort of experiential thing here. Since we are talking about meditation and the brain, I'm just going to ask you to open your minds and try a little something with me before we start. So if you're comfortable, just gently closing your eyes. If not, you can have your eyes sort of half closed. Just allow your gaze to soften. And just bring your awareness to your breath. So just noting to yourself silently in your mind as you breathe in, noting in. And as you breathe out, just noting out. And as you're doing that, see if you can feel the breath as it flows in through your nostrils. Sort of cool air coming in through your sinuses, and feel your belly rising. And as you breathe out, feel the belly dropping. And feel the warmer, moist air flowing out through your nostrils. So just try that for a few breaths, noting in and out. Feeling the breath in the body. And before long, you'll become aware of thoughts coming into your mind. They may be thoughts of the past or the future, judgments, this is silly, why am I doing this? And just noticing those without any evaluations. They're just there. They are what they are. And then allowing the thoughts to just float on by and coming back to the breath. So just redirecting attention to your breath each time the mind wanders. So nowhere to go, nothing to do, just noting, breathing in, feel the belly rise. Breathing out, feel the belly fall. And you may, sometimes we use a metaphor. So you may think of thoughts like a river flowing along. And usually, we're right there in the river, we're tumbling around in the white caps, the waves up and down. So imagine now, with this practice, it's like crawling out on the bank and using your breath as an anchor. The breath anchoring you in the side of the river so it still flows by. There's still waves and white caps. But instead of being swept up in the river, you're just sitting with the breath, rising and falling, and just observing those thoughts as they appear in the horizon, float by, and disappear. So each time the mind wanders, gently bringing it back. So not trying to control the breath, just letting it come and go as it will. And then just gently open the eyes, coming back to the room. So that's your very brief introduction to a certain type of meditation. And we can sort of talk about that in the discussion if you're interested. So this is a cartoon I always use. You've probably already figured this out. She says, we're here for the Happiness Through Meditation seminar. Oh, no, that was a typo. Happiness Through Medication. It's for all the psychiatrists in the crowd. She says, I told you we should have gone to the movies instead of pursuing happiness. So I'm sure you've already figured out this is the meditation seminar. And what I'm going to do here is take about 15 minutes just to introduce you to some of the background around practices of meditation. So first I'll talk about what is meditation. It may seem obvious to you, but actually it's quite a controversial issue of defining meditation. I'll introduce just some very basics of the main types of meditation practice. Overview how meditation typically is studied. And there's two main ways that people have been doing that, through observational studies and then experimental studies where we teach people meditation. And very quickly overview some major research results to date. And I'll talk a bit about an organization interested in studying meditation, if any of you want to pursue this, and that's the Mind and Life Institute. And then I'll introduce our speakers. So what is meditation? Believe it or not, as I said, it's very difficult to define. So do you have to be like this yogi to be meditating? Perhaps you have to be a Buddhist monk. Maybe meditation's just a state of mind. And what about this little baby? Do you have to have intention to meditate? And how about this fellow here out in nature? Is he meditating? So some definitions have appeared in the literature. One is a very broad definition that meditation is a type of mental training or a process of familiarization with one's own mental inner life, which may lead to long-lasting changes in cognition and emotion. And some of the people who study meditation use that kind of definition. I've been working with a group through the National Center for Complementary Alternative Medicine who's actually been trying to come up with a definition. And some of the essential criteria that we've been throwing around are that meditation practice is a defined, specific technique. It often involves a state of psychophysical relaxation, although we'll see in Dr. Honda's talks that perhaps that's not the case in the meditation he's studying. And often it involves what we call logic relaxation. And this is really taking a stance that's non-analytical, non-judging, with no real outcome expectation. So it's not goal-directed. It's kind of open-minded curiosity to introspect about the nature of one's own mind. And also that it's a self-induced state or mode. So it can be taught by an instructor, and often is, but is usually applied by the individual purposefully with intention. So that's one possible definition. So what about some of the common types of meditation? You may be familiar with what's called transcendental meditation, or TM. And most all meditations come from an ancient tradition in India. And so the most basic had Hindu origins, and TM comes from that. And this is a type of meditation that's practiced with a mantra. So a mantra is a word or a syllable, usually in Sanskrit, the original language of the Hindu texts. And a person repeats that mantra over and over as a way to focus concentration. Often the mantra has some kind of spiritual or philosophical meaning. So transcendental meditation is this type of mantra meditation. Another form that's very popular, and a lot of the research in the West studies, is called mindfulness meditation. And the Pali word for mindfulness is vipassana, and actually is sometimes translated as insights. And this is practiced in areas, so Buddhism began in India and it spread north and also east. And the vipassana tradition comes from what's called Theravadan Buddhism, and it's mostly practiced in Southeast Asia, so Burma, Thailand, those sorts of places. Now, you're probably also very familiar with Zen meditation, and this is the transformation that the practice took when it moved into areas such as Japan and Korea, and is the type of practice that's done in Zen Buddhism. So whereas mindfulness meditation, I guess I didn't really describe the practice, that's what we were doing just now. It's really open, bare awareness of everything that's happening in the attentional field without judgment. And the idea is that it leads to eventual insight, liberation, and eventual freedom, which is what enlightenment is. So Zen meditation is a similar kind of practice. It's breath-focused and it's very disciplined. And then there's Tibetan meditation as well. So those of you who are familiar with the Dalai Lama, and a lot of the early work in neuroscience with monks was done with Tibetan monks. And they have a broad range of different meditation practices, ranging from breath awareness, concentration practices, to lots of mental imagery, and also cultivating beneficial states of mind. So one of the studies I'm going to talk about is looking at the results of generating compassion towards all living beings, and that's a practice that's done in Tibetan meditation as well as in Theravadan or Vipassana practice. Oops. Okay. So I didn't speak about the sort of possession trance, and the reason I bring this up is because Dr. Honda's talk, in large part, is about people in a sort of altered state of consciousness in Bali that's called a possession trance. So we see people, I took this actually from one of his papers, and there's music playing and there's a sort of traditional setting, and people will fall into this trance where this fellow's in a trance and he's attacking here the witch doctor or the shaman, and he's falling down and he's doing all sorts of things. So I'm being a bit provocative here, but I like to ask the question, so is this sort of possession trance also a form of meditation? And that's an open question that I think we can maybe discuss later. So how is meditation studied? This is the Dalai Lama here, Tibetan tradition. He's the leader of the Tibetan Buddhist, well, political as well as sort of spiritual community. So observational studies have often looked at qualities of long-term meditators, so these monks or people in the West who've been meditating for many, many years. And so often what's looked at are different types of outcomes. So there could be psychological outcomes. Are these people particularly mentally healthy? Biological outcomes, as well as the sort of neurological or neuroscience-oriented outcomes. So in a bit more detail, the psychological measures usually are self-report, questionnaire type things. And often we look at anxiety, depression, anger, stress symptoms, quality of life, and also more positive psychological features such as compassion or empathy to see if those are developed through meditation practice. There's also biological measures. For example, taking blood pressure, taking blood or saliva samples to look at stress hormone production, or looking at immune functioning to see if meditation training can affect those things as well. So the neurological stuff, I'll talk about clinical in a second. So some things that are done that we're going to hear about are this EEG. Looks like fun, doesn't it? So this fellow's got a cap. It's got about 120 little electrodes on it. And you put that on a person, and you can measure the signals coming from the brain waves. So you can actually measure that at the level of the scalp, and that gives you some idea of brain patterns. This is an MRI machine, and that's actually Dr. Davidson, whose work I'm going to summarize in a moment. So you can put a person on there, slide them in there, do some imaging of what's happening in their brain, looking at both the structure of the brain and also the function, what areas are activated when you ask them, for example, to meditate. So that's one technique we'll hear about too. This is a PET scan. So this is a sort of image you get of a person's brain, and the different colors indicate how much activation there are in the different brain regions. And as you'll hear from Dr. Lazar, we know quite well in neuropsychology what brain regions are important for different mental functions. So you can link it all together. And then the clinical outcomes, this is the sort of work I do. Whoops, wrong thing. Where we're looking at usually medical populations, either mental health or physical health issues. And so often we look at disease symptoms. So for example, if a lot of the research has been done with cardiovascular disease, so you may look at if they're likely to have a relapse or if their blood pressure goes down, or you can look at atherosclerosis, so sort of plaque forming in the veins. And we look at severity of disease, and we can actually look at disease outcome. So the major research results, I'm going to just summarize one important study from the Davidson lab. And this was in a PNAS that we've heard about. And Antoine Lutz is a graduate student who's been doing a lot of this work. And what they did was they assessed 8 Buddhist monks. And they compared the brain patterns of them to 10 non-meditating controls. And they used EEG, that cap you saw, with all those different leads. Now these monks had been meditating for a long time. So imagine 10,000 to 50,000 hours of meditation. It takes a long time. A lot of these monks have been practicing for 40 years. Some of them had. And now the control people were just taught over the period of 2 or 3 sessions very basic meditation instruction, similar to what I did with you just a few moments ago. And in the experimental condition, they were asked to meditate on loving kindness and compassion. And this is a very common practice in the Tibetan tradition, where they're trying to come up with non-referential compassion. So it's not just for someone they know or they love, it's for all beings. The sort of overwhelming blanket sensation of compassion and kindness. And while they were doing that, they measured the brainwave frequencies with the EEG caps. So I'm going to show you some graphs here. And what we're seeing here, now they looked at brainwave frequencies in different areas or different frequencies. And one that's very important is gamma frequency. And I'll explain that in a second, but they compared the controls and the practitioners from their resting baseline, so just sort of the base patterns of sort of brain waves, compared to when they were meditating. So with the controls, this is individual subjects, there was no change. Basically, when they were sitting there doing nothing, and when they were supposedly meditating, their brain waves didn't change at all. But in the meditators, you can see huge increases when they were meditating compared to their baseline. Now, these gamma frequencies were also occurring in all different parts of the brain, so they were occurring sort of synchronized. And there's controversy about what gamma sort of frequencies mean, but they're related to learning and memory and acquiring new information. This is another representation of that. So here we've got the initial baseline and an ongoing baseline, and then during the meditative state, The controls, there was no change in their gamma frequencies at all, but the meditators on average could produce a whole bunch more of this gamma synchrony than the controls when they were meditating. And here, these are the brain scans. So you don't need to be in neuroscience to see there's not much going on here. Not much going on in those brains. But when you look at the brains of the monks, comparing their baseline to their meditative state, this is showing increases. So the hotter the color, the red and the yellow, shows areas where there's huge increases in these gamma wave frequencies. So what you're seeing here in the trained monks is that they're really able to create a state of mind that's very qualitatively and quantitatively different than people who are not trained in meditation. And there's ongoing research to figure out what that's going to mean in terms of different mental functions. What's going on? Oops, okay. So that's absolute gamma power increase in meditation. So quickly, some experimental studies. Typically, these are done where you take novices, people like yourself, and teach you meditation over the course of usually about 8 weeks. The most common type of program is known as mindfulness-based stress reduction, or MBSR. And this was founded by a fellow named John Kabat-Zinn back in about 1979 at the University of Massachusetts Medical Center. And he really, the genius was to bring together the meditation with Western techniques of stress reduction to come up with a program that was very open and secular and appropriate for people from all different backgrounds. And so he created this 8-week program. And it's been very readily applied in probably about 300 different centers now offered around the world. A modification on this is mindfulness-based cognitive therapy. And this is specifically designed for prevention of relapse in people who have had major depressive disorders. And if you know anybody who's been depressed, typically it's a recurring thing. So people will be depressed, they'll recover, they'll get depressed again. So with this mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, people learn to relate to their thoughts in a different way. And what they've shown with this research is that people are far less likely to have future episodes of depression once they've learned the mindfulness techniques. So it's, again, an 8-week program. It's a modification on the MBSR. And the Transcendental Meditation program has also been used a lot to teach novices, particularly in the area of cardiovascular health. So some of the major research results in these experimental studies by John Kabat-Zinn and others, initially he was using the program for anxiety disorders and chronic pain. It was very effective for increasing people's ability to live with pain, as well as anxiety disorders. There's some very interesting work with psoriasis, which is a skin condition where people get lesions all over their body. And there was a study where people who were being treated for psoriasis were taught very simple meditation, half of them, and half of them didn't learn that at all. And their skin actually cleared up faster. So the people who did the meditation practice, they took photos of the lesions and they measured them. And the people who learned meditation were twice as quick to clear those lesions in their skin. That was the only difference. It's been applied for eating disorders because people often eat very automatically and mindlessly, and with some success, and also for substance abuse problems. Now I have to say a little bit about my research, and we work actually in cancer patients. I'm in the Department of Oncology, and we've been showing improvements in cancer patients with the MBSR program for decreasing stress symptoms, improving mood, so depression, less anxiety. They have more energy, less anger, less fatigue. We've shown that they're actually sleeping a lot better. And we've been interested to look at some of the stress hormones and immune function as well in people going through the program. And we've shown some decreases in stress hormones that tend to be elevated in some cancer patients. And we show some changes in immune functioning away from a pattern associated with depression and stress to a more healthy balance of production of immune products. So I'll finish just by talking a bit about the Mind and Life Institute. It was founded in 1983, and it was a collaboration between the Dalai Lama, who is a representative of Tibetan Buddhism, and Western scientists. And what they do, or they have been doing for many years, is sponsoring yearly dialogues between Eastern practitioners, so monks and people who are interested, and scientists from a lot of different fields. That's the website if you're interested in looking at it. And it's not only for scientists in the area of the neurosciences, but they're actually interested in the interface between meditative practices and philosophy and lots of different sciences like physics and chemistry and all sorts of things. So these are just some photos from the Mind and Life Dialogue. That's the Dalai Lama just this year in Denver. And that's sort of what it looks like on the screen or on the stage when we have one of these dialogues going. There'll be a number of practitioners, monks, and it's really similar to this sort of frontiers of science. The idea is to foster dialogue and common areas of interest, and are there ways that we can work together to understand this phenomenon a little better. So just to give you an idea of some of the dialogues in the past, there we go. We've looked at clinical applications of meditation, the nature of matter and life, quantum physics, physics and cosmology, ethics, compassion, dreaming, emotions and health. So right back to 1987, a number of different topics. And the other thing I don't have a slide on is what they are doing now every year is called a Summer Research Institute, and actually is targeted for young investigators as well as established investigators who are interested in learning more about meditation practice and also learning more about the research. And that happens every year now in June, and you can find information on that from the website as well. All right, so I'm going to finish my part by introducing our speakers today. So our first speaker, well, like the picture I had while you're laughing, Sarah Lazar, who's at Harvard University. So she is a neuroscientist in the Department of Psychiatry at Massachusetts General Hospital. And her lab is studying the effects of meditation and yoga on the brain and cognition. And her talk is going to be called Using the Mind to Change the Brain. And I'll also introduce Manabu Honda as well while I'm up here. And he's at the National Center of Neurology and Psychiatry and the Yamashiro Institute of Science and Culture. And he's going to be talking to us about the interface of traditional Asian wisdom and mental science and a neurobiological approach to altered states of consciousness, which is going to be very interesting. So thank you for your time, and I'll turn it over to our first speaker.